AI-generated. Story Collection 2, 1. Inspector Squits.
Jack was a toilet inspector, or at least he claimed to be. He didn't care if the toilets he was inspecting were in use or not. All he wanted to do was make sure they were up to standard. He would even go as far as giving tickets to women for incorrectly using the toilet and guiding them on the proper way to go to the bathroom. But nobody seemed to know that his badge was fake, and it wasn't long until suspicion was raised among the women he was supposedly inspecting. One day, while Jack was inspecting a ladies' restroom, he began to feel a strange sensation inside him. Worse still, the sensation seemed to be getting stronger and stronger by the second. That's when it happened. Out of Jack's stomach, a live chicken suddenly burst forth. Of course, Jack was embarrassed. He had no idea how a chicken had ended up inside of him. Months later, an investigation by the authorities revealed that Jack had actually been using his fake inspector badge to gain access to the women's restrooms to carry out his creepy chicken scheme. To this day, it remains a mystery why Jack had chosen to store a live chicken inside of him for so long.
2. The CEO.
The boardroom went silent as the CEO stepped into the room. No one had expected the all-powerful empire builder to look this way. At first glance, he appeared to be no more than an average-sized man. But up close it was apparent that something was off. His hands were tinier than any have ever seen. Fingers unnaturally short and stubby. As he looked around the table, his eyes seemed to disappear into his heavily tanned face. Without saying a word, the CEO moved around the table and began to caress and grope everyone in the room. It was an awkward and lengthy occurrence that left everyone feeling uncomfortable. One of the board members finally mustered up the courage to speak. "Sir, I'm afraid I don't understand your behavior." Without responding, the CEO made his way around the table again, this time placing each of his tiny hands onto every board member's forehead in succession. A sudden calm fell over the room, as though time had stopped. It seemed impossible that someone with such tiny hands could command such power. It was as though the CEO was manifesting his will onto the others. Everyone was stunned by the unexpected turn of events, and they watched quietly as the CEO continued to move around the room, never losing eye contact with the board. Finally, the CEO addressed the group. "I know what you're thinking. I can't possibly have the strength to grow this company without help, right? That's why I manifest my will with my tiny little hands. I can manifest anything I want, and you can't stop me." The CEO then made one final move, softly melting back into his chair before concluding the meeting. It was as though he had just revealed a secret power that no one had known existed. Everyone in the room was left in awe at what they had witnessed.
3. You're in trouble.
She nervously stepped into the business meeting, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been planning this for weeks, and she was determined to make it work. She had stolen the urine from her neighbor's medicine cabinet and filled her sports bottle with it. She had no idea what she was going to do with it, but she was determined to make it work. At the meeting, she was greeted by a group of business people who were discussing a potential deal. She tried to focus on the conversation, but her mind kept wandering to the sports bottle in her bag. She knew she had to get rid of it before the meeting was over. Just as she was about to make her move, she heard a loud thud. She had dropped the sports bottle, and the urine was spilling all over the floor. Everyone in the room stopped and stared at her in shock. She quickly grabbed the bottle and tried to clean up the mess, but it was too late. The business people were appalled and quickly ushered her out of the room. As she was leaving, she heard a disappointed cry coming from her suitcase. She had forgotten that she had brought her young daughter with her to the meeting. She had been so focused on the meeting that she had neglected her daughter's needs. She quickly apologized to her daughter and promised to make it up to her. She knew that she had made a mistake, but she was determined to make it right. She vowed to never forget her daughter's needs again.
4. Animal lover.
He was a strict vegan who enjoyed fox hunting and fishing, which seemed like a contradiction. Until you learned he was a member of PETA and worked for an animal charity. Every day he would dedicate himself to making the lives of animals better. But one day, as he was out on a walk, he turned a corner and accidentally slipped inside a stranger. It seemed that his feet had been pulled in by some unseen force before he could even think. He felt at once embarrassed and intrigued, yet he cannot justify why. The man he'd stepped inside never moved, or even acknowledged that the vegan was there with him, turning the vegan's confusion to fear. As he stood motionless, unsure of what to do next, he suddenly felt a gentle warmth emanating from the stranger, as if he was absorbing all his hopes that had been lost. The vegan stepped out of the stranger, his heart full of a newfound peace he'd never felt before. As he walked away, he felt a shift in his perspective and a clarity in regards to his purpose. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew it had changed his life.
5. Pound those rings.
Dave had been a regular at his local community center since he was a kid. He had spent countless hours playing pickup basketball games with the other kids in the neighborhood, as well as hanging out with the older kids who showed him how to pound rings with a big rubber mallet. At first, Dave was just another one of the kids pounding rings, but soon enough he stood out from the rest. He had a certain style and finesse when it came to pounding the rings that the other kids hadn't seen before. His ring pieces were always perfectly shaped, with a gooey center that no one else could replicate. It wasn't long before Dave became the ring master of the neighborhood, the one everyone looked to for advice and tips on how to pound the best rings. He was the center of the group, and it was much more than just pounding rings together. It was the camaraderie that kept them all together, and it was clear to everyone that Dave was the leader. His knowledge of the game and his ability to bring everyone together made him essential to the success of the neighborhood. He was the one who showed everyone how important it was to rely on each other, to respect each other, and to show patience when it came to perfecting their ring pounding skills. He was the center of the group and the glue that held them all together. His gooey center and the power of his local community center were the keys to the success of his group of ring pounding pounders, and he will always be remembered for that.
6. Pumped.
Sam was always freshly pumped. In the morning, he reveled in it, the feeling of the sun's rays gliding down his skin, giving him just enough warmth to make it through the day. He could feel his muscles expanding, slowly getting stronger as he went about his work. At lunchtime, he was still freshly pumped. Each time he opened his lunchbox at work, he felt a rush, a surge of energy that helped him push through the day. He enjoyed the feeling of it, of becoming part of his environment, despite the challenges that lay ahead. In the evenings, Sam kept himself freshly pumped, too. He went for an extra long run, pushing himself beyond his limits in order to prepare for the next day. Each stride was like a new high, the adrenaline making him feel invincible. When it was time for bed, Sam was soft-pumped. The tiredness ebbed away, and he felt so relaxed that it was almost like he was levitating. He could feel the tension from the day melting away as he drifted off into a peaceful sleep. But on the weekends, Sam was hard-pumped. He made sure to get up and do something that would challenge him, pushing his body to its limits. He especially enjoyed taking on the toughest hikes, as they gave him a feeling of strength and accomplishment and helped to make the most of his weekend. In every situation, Sam was wide open. No matter the circumstances, he strived to stay focused and motivated and put himself out there to make the most of it, whatever it may be. He was happy that he could be freshly pumped, even in the most challenging of times.
7. Steve.
When Steve was a young man, he never imagined that he would one day marry a woman he had never met. But that was the situation he found himself in when he agreed to a marriage arranged by Aldi Wedding Services. It was a surprisingly simple ceremony held in a public men's room. Steve's bride-to-be was wearing an Adidas tracksuit and an expression of sheer boredom. Neither of them had any real enthusiasm for the proceedings, but they both felt obligated to go through with it. The lice were optional, but the couple decided to go with the package deal. It was a small price to pay for a quick and easy way to get married. After the ceremony, Steve and his new wife decided to go out for a drink. But as they stepped out of the men's room, they were met with a chorus of laughter. It seemed that the tracksuit was a bit too tight on the bride-to-be. The guests couldn't help but point and laugh as her belly button popped out of the top. Steve and his wife were embarrassed, but they quickly decided to make the best of it. They laughed along with the guests and made a joke about how Aldi Wedding Services had failed to account for the bride size. The couple went on to have a wonderful marriage. They had a lot of fun together, and the lice were never an issue. They often joked about that fateful day in the public men's room, and how they had managed to make the most of an otherwise boring wedding.
8. Aqua Sham.
Alice never thought she could be so brave, but when she saw the large fish drowning in the water, she knew she had to act quickly. She ran to the edge of the lake and plunged into the icy cold water, determined to save the life of the fish. She swam with all her might towards the struggling fish, and after several desperate attempts, managed to get a hold of it. But as soon as she grabbed the slippery creature, she was pulled underwater by its desperate movements. She fought and fought against the powerful grip of the fish, but eventually, she was too exhausted and went limp, sinking further down into the depths of the lake. When she finally woke up, she found herself in a hospital bed. She was told that it had taken heroic effort to save the fish, but that she had lost her arms in the process. Though it was a huge sacrifice, she was happy to find out that the fish were safe and sound, and she was satisfied with the result of her brave actions. From then on, she was known throughout the small town as the courageous and heroic woman who had risked her own life to save the fish. She wore her arms proudly, knowing that her small effort had made a difference and changed the lives of those little creatures. The town named a special day in her honor, and the lake was renamed after her. She was a reminder to all that courage, strength, and determination can make a difference.
9. ROK 777.
The day she discovered her 10 million powers in Rise of Kingdoms was the day her life changed. She was granted access to do whatever she wanted. No repercussions, no justice. Feeling powerful and invincible, she utilized her free passes and summoned the legendary hero Mucky from a long-lost kingdom. She also began stealing wheelchairs and throwing children around like they were dolls. Soon, news of her terrible crimes started to spread around. But due to the unspeakable power bestowed upon her, no one could do anything to stop her. Until one day, an unlikely hero emerged. An employee from the local cardboard factory, an older man who worked at the factory for many years and whose life had been a hard, tedious one. Someone who had dedicated his life to providing for his family. He had seen what she was doing and couldn't stand by and do nothing. He immediately stepped forward and confronted her. He had 20 million powers. They were both shocked when he managed to overpower her. The man had found an inner strength and courage that he didn't know he had. He was able to turn her into authorities and put an end to her criminal rampage. The man was celebrated for his bravery and his strength. He gained newfound admiration from all over, and she was sent to prison where she would face the consequences of her actions. From then on, the man was remembered for his selfless act. All the children had their wheelchairs replaced, and they could walk happily again. It was a lesson for everyone that one person could make all the difference, no matter your background or circumstance. That when rising up against terrible injustice, strength can come from even the unlikeliest of sources.
10. The Library.
John had been nervously studying in the library for hours when he heard it. A whisper that seemed to come from nowhere, "You're round as hell." He looked around and saw no one, but then a voice spoke louder. "Yeah, I'm talking to you. You round as hell?" John was startled to see a man standing in the corner of the library, fully slathered in baby oil. His nervousness only intensified as the stranger took a few steps closer, his eyes never leaving John's. John was about to say something, but before he could get a word out, the man had put his fingers in John's mouth. John was so taken aback, he didn't know what to do. He just stood there, like a deer in headlights, as the man began to rub his fingers around John's mouth. The man then looked John in the eyes and said, "Your mouth looks like it could use some sweetness. Here, have some of my candy." He then proceeded to offer John a piece of candy. John was so shocked and embarrassed that he was unable to move or speak. He just stood there, not knowing what to do or say. The man then just laughed and said, "Hey, I'm just playing. You're all right, just don't tell anyone about this." He then winked and walked away, leaving John in a state of confusion and shock. John was still trying to process what had just happened when he heard a voice from the corner of the library. "Hey, I think he likes you." John looked over to see the same man from before, now wearing a satisfied smirk and a pair of sunglasses. He just smiled and waved before disappearing out of sight. John was left standing in the library, shaking his head in disbelief and wondering what had just happened. He knew he'd never forget this strange encounter, and he also knew he would never tell anyone what had happened.
You watched the whole thing. Well done. Have a great day.